Chief of Staff. Stavka has decided to bomb Berlin. This unexpected message interrupted my morning report by the fleet commander. Our bombers can reach Berlin only from the airfield of Isel, continued Komflot. The commander of the Fleet Air Force will take care of the concentration of aircraft on the island. You are instructed to urgently organize the delivery from Kronstadt to the island of the necessary stock of gasoline and bombs, so that enough for 10 to 12 strikes on Berlin. Is the weight clear? Act, joyfully finished the commander. Stavka's decision to strike Hitler's lair Berlin we took with enthusiasm. We wanted to take revenge on the Nazis for all our sorrows. General M.I. Moskalenko came to the headquarters. We immediately began to calculate how many floating means would be needed. The operation was to be prepared in absolute secrecy. After discussing all possible options, we came to the conclusion that the most reliable to deliver the cargo on the base minesweepers. At the same time, we will let them go without special protection, so as not to attract the attention of the enemy. The minesweepers will go as they used to go, checking the fairways. All responsibility for the stealthy loading of barrels of gasoline and bombs was assigned to the Chief of Staff of the Kronstadt Naval Base, Captain 2nd Rank F. O.V. Zozulia. Unnoticed by the enemy, our bombers flew to the island airfield and began to prepare for the task. Meanwhile, minesweepers under the command of young but already shelled officers, including Senior Lieutenant N. S. Dibelov, came to Kronstadt, took the cargo and immediately went on a return voyage. About what was on their board knew a small number of people. Even the duty service of the headquarters in Kronstadt and Tallinn were not privy to this secret. Operators watched the passage of minesweepers, not even realizing what a responsible task these small ships were carrying out. Time stretches slowly. We don't sleep. At night came to me with regular reports of the operational duty captain 3rd Rank V. I. Andreev. I looked at the map. A circular checked the distance that still have to pass minesweepers. Andreev said, "I do not understand anything. Fleet Commander has already called me twice with the map. Also interested in these 2 minesweepers. You're always asking about them. We have more important ships at sea. Why do these ships get so much attention?" I smiled. "You know how few minesweepers we have, so we are all worried about their fate. Please continue to report all incoming reports at once." I do not know whether Andreev was satisfied with my answer, but he did not ask any more questions. At dawn, the head of the rear calls me. "Well, how is it?" As if everything is all right, I answer him. "Then I'll go and lie down." We understood each other perfectly. And when I read the report at 8.00 we gave the anchor, it seemed to me that I even heard the solemn rumble of the anchor chain in the Bay of Isel. I fly through the steps to the Komflot. He is sitting at the working map and smiling broadly. He already knew everything. Now it was up to our glorious Baltic pilots. Lieutenant General of Aviation Zhavoronkov arrived from Moscow to help us in organizing the strikes. Between August 8th and September 4th, our DB-3 bombers, under the command of Colonel E.N. Preobrazhensky at night, in difficult weather conditions 9 times struck Berlin. Dozens of heavy bombs fell on the fascist capital, for Hitlerites a complete surprise. At first they thought that it was the work of the British, so it was said in operational reports of Hitler's Reich. But the British immediately refuted this message. Their aircraft did not fly to Berlin. The Nazis realized that the bombers were Soviet. Taking off from Isel, the bombers went over the sea at high altitude, broke through several belts of anti-aircraft defense, and dropped bombs, causing explosions and huge fires. Not a single one of our aircraft over Berlin the enemy failed to shoot down. These strikes were of great importance. In the days when fascist troops were approaching Leningrad and Moscow, Baltic naval pilots bombed the very den of the fascist beast. This gave new strength to our people, strengthened hope. Now our pilots reach Berlin by air, but there will be a time when we will get there by land. And the situation near Tallinn was getting worse. On August 8th, the enemy came to the sea and surrounded the city from the land. All routes to the east were cut off. No more steam engine horns were heard. The station square was deserted. The streets are empty. No more suburban buses to be seen on them. It's as if the entrance gates to the city have slammed shut. The already narrow streets became quite gloomy. No lights in the evening. Patrols were marching along the sidewalks, stamping their steps. Tallinn was turning into a military camp. Barricades and shelters were hastily built on the outskirts. The rumble of heavy gun salvos often rolled over the hushed city. The batteries of the island of Egna and the cruiser Kirov are firing, supporting with their fire the units fighting near Tallinn. The 10th Infantry Corps of the 8th Army is fighting hard. It suffered heavy losses, was deprived of equipment. Now there are only 16,000 soldiers left in the corps, tired, exhausted by continuous fighting. Corps Commander Major General N.F. Nikolaev came to us. He looked at our map of the situation near Tallinn with a long, hard look, silently made some measurements with a circular. Leaving the map, the general studied the information about the composition of our forces and their location. He was most interested in the artillery of the fleet. At last he rose, throwing his pencil on the table. Well then, we'll fight. We only need to strengthen the positions of our defences. Tallinn is surrounded. It became obvious that all the forces of land defence must be united in one hand. The military council decided to create the headquarters of the land defence of the city on the basis of the headquarters of the air defence of the fleet. Major General Zashikin took command of the defence of the main base. To organise the interaction of artillery ships with the coastal defence, appointed deputy commander of the defence of the main base. This post was entrusted to the flagship artilleryman of the fleet, Captain First Rank N.E. Feldman. First of all, it was necessary to create a clear and very mobile organisation of fire control of more than 80 guns of various calibre from 100 to 300 millimetres. And we must give credit to N.E. Feldman, under his leadership artillerymen and communications fleet, in a very short period of time created special lines of artillery communication with the defence units. For all mapped positions were made passports, and the targets were numbered. At the front line were deployed 12 correction posts, 5 of them mobile. In all this was a great merit of the flag officer of the squadron, Captain First Rank Segoyan. Having received requests from army units, ships and coastal batteries immediately opened fire. Clear centralised system of fire control of the fleet justified itself in all respects, proving to be survivable, reliable and, most importantly, very mobile. Fleet headquarters also introduced a new disposition of ships in the roadstead, which facilitated fire on the shore and made more reliable air defence of ships. To support the coastal section of the front east of Tallinn in the area of Kara Lakt and Kolga Lak bays, a division of gunboats operated. Here were the most persistent battles. The enemy tried to break through to the city from the east along the coast to cut us off from harbours and ships. The fire of 130mm guns of gunboats under the command of Captain Second Rank N.V. Antonov quickly cooled the ardour of the fascists. Especially cannon boats Moscow and Amgon were shooting skillfully. Hitlerites at once realised what kind of force it is our artillery ships. Fascist aviation frantically bombed the boats, but the sailors successfully repelled the attacks of Junkers, and on August 14th the Moskva even shot down one of the enemy bombers. Life has shown that just as in artillery, required centralised management of all means of combating mine danger. Rear Admiral Y.F. Raw reported to the Military Council his proposals. They were accepted. August 10th formed the headquarters of the Fleet Mine Defence. The head of mine defence of the fleet was appointed Y.F. Raw. He was subordinate not only minesweepers, but also that part of the light fast-moving forces, which put mines on the skerries under the very nose of the enemy. Mine Defence Headquarters brought order and clarity to the actions of all mine-sweeping forces in the movement of convoys and even escorting submarines. Ensuring that submarines went to sea and returned to base became increasingly difficult. Previously, the boats followed the Suela Vein Strait between the islands of Dago and Isle. But the enemy scouted this way and every time tried to track down our boats here. Therefore, in August we trawled a new deep water fairway in the southern part of the Gulf of Finland. On August 6th, an escort of 5 base minesweepers and 5 small hunters safely met the submarine C-8. In the sea and led to the base, although on the way the minesweepers caught 14 enemy mines. This mine bank at the entrance to the fairway was quite fresh. Fortunately, it was quickly eliminated. Escorting and meeting submarines were engaged in the headquarters of the head of submarine navigation Captain First Rank Stetsenko and head of mine defense Rear Admiral Rawl. With their participation, dozens of boats were held. Unfortunately, did not do without losses. Thus, already at their shores on the approach to the Soelaviane Strait, the submarine S-11 was lost. She was returning from the distant Danzig Bay. It was commanded by Lieutenant Captain A. M. Sereda. The commander of the 2nd Submarine Division, Captain 3rd Rank I. N. Tuzov, participated in the campaign. Both are experienced submariners. In the area of Libava, they sank the Nazi transport Kaya displacement of 5,000 tons. The boat was already at the rendezvous point. A boat came to its side. And at that moment there was an incredible explosion, and the boat sank. The severely wounded commander, several officers and sailors were picked up from the water and brought to the base. As it later turned out, the S-11 was killed by a magnetic mine explosion. A few days later, Stetsenko told me that 3 more sailors from the lost boat had just arrived in Tallinn. I had already stopped being surprised by such fantastic cases, having become convinced of the ingenuity and courage of our people. So I only asked, "Where did they get out from?" "From the bottom of the sea." "Exactly." It turned out that in the aft compartment of the sunken boat remained 4 sailors, Komsomol Torpedoist Senior Red Fleet N.A., Nikishin, Electricians Red Fleet A. V. Maznin, V. Mariev, and Commodore Red Fleet V. Zinoviev. V. Zinoviev. They were in total darkness. The water was arriving. It reached the sailors already to the chest. The submariners decided to go out through the torpedo apparatus, but there was a torpedo in it. Sailors, and this time helped ingenuity and excellent knowledge of technology. Nikitin in the darkness found a flexible hose, and the air from the spare torpedo transferred to the battle tank of the torpedo apparatus. After much labor, torpedo fired. The exit from the compartment was open, but it was an exit into the dark abyss of the sea. Sailors threw a buoy on the surface. Nikishin was the first to dive into the narrow tube of the torpedo apparatus. When he surfaced from a depth of 20 meters, it was already night, blew a fresh breeze, the sea wavered. The shore was barely visible, it was more than a mile away. Maznin was the second to get out. After looking around, he dived again, returned through the torpedo apparatus to the compartment to prepare his comrades for the exit. And the water had already flooded almost the entire room. Only at the very ceiling the submarine there was still an air cushion. The conversation with Mariev did not work. The electrician had lost his mind. Having explained to Zinoviev how to behave on the ascent, Maznin surfaced, but the difficult journey took away all his strength. He lost consciousness and went to the bottom. Nikishin dived twice, until he picked him up and pulled him to the air. Having brought his comrade to his senses, Nikishin tied him to a life buoy and himself swam to the shore for help. He swam for a long time. Already began to fall into unconsciousness from fatigue, when pushed into the barbed wire, which was girdled around the island in anticipation of enemy landing. Here at dawn he was picked up by the soldiers of the island garrison. A dinghy was immediately equipped. Comrades removed from the buoy almost lifeless body Maznin. Zinoviev, who had been in the flooded compartment for 16 hours, was also rescued. He tried to save Mariev, but he did not understand anything. He ended up suffocating. And the 3 heroes, otherwise they cannot be called, a few days rested in the hospital and then returned to the ranks. Looking ahead, I will say that Nikishin remained a hero until the end of his life. He was an excellent fighter, in peacetime graduated from the institute, worked as an engineer in Leningrad. One day late in the evening, he saw how several unknown people attacked a girl. Without thinking, Nikishin rushed to her aid. The bandits put in motion knives, but could not cope with the Baltic bobetyr, and fled. Nikishin took the girl to the bus, and only then went to the hospital. Here he lost consciousness. Doctors counted on his body more than a dozen heavy wounds. He died from loss of blood. The Baltic soon adequately avenged the Nazis for the death of the S-11. Returning from the sea submarine Sheikh 307, almost in the same place where the S-11 died, found an enemy submarine. The commander of the Soviet boat, Lieutenant Captain N.I. Petrov, immediately attacked the enemy. 2 torpedoes were fired from a distance of only 3 cable meters. The Nazi submarine broke in half and sank. None of its crew surfaced. By decision of the Stavka, the leadership of the defense of Tallinn from August 17th was entrusted to the commander of the fleet Vice Admiral V.F. Tributes, with subordination to him all the troops withdrawn to the near frontiers. General Nikolaev was appointed deputy commander of the fleet for the land defense of Tallinn. He is subordinate to all land defense of the base. The 10th Corps occupies the defense line in 28 to 30 kilometers from the city. Its flanks rest in the bays in the east Hara Lat and in the west Paldiski Lat. In both bays are fleet ships and their artillery fire day and night to support the troops fighting on land. Major General Nikolaev, having toured the front of the base defense, made a detailed report with all the calculations to the military council of the fleet. Troops are completely insufficient, he said. We need additional mobilization of forces. He was certainly right, and that is why the new formation of units from sailors began urgently. The Central Committee of the Estonian Communist Party was of great help to us. It launched energetic political work among the Estonian population. An appeal in Estonian appeared to the workers, peasants, and Estonian youth. All the enterprises of Tallinn switched to work for the needs of defense. The workers of the city formed an Estonian regiment. The workers of the ship repair shops and arsenal built a railway battery of naval guns in a matter of days, and the Estonian shipping company built 2 armoured trains in its workshops. At the Kopli factory, the production of 55mm mortars and mines for them began. All this greatly increased the power of our fire, political department of the fleet political organs and party organizations were tireless educational work among the sailors. Military council appealed to the personnel of the ships, anti-aircraft gunners, coastal artillerymen and marines with a fervent call to defend every inch of the native land. Not a step back, these were the words that ended each leaflet. The military council sent dozens of communist agitators to the newly formed fleet units, marine infantry units, and to the 10th Rifle Corps. In the most threatened areas of the front were authorized representatives of the military council from among the employees of the political administration of the fleet. Sailors, willing to fight on the land front, was more than enough, and the fleet headquarters in many cases had to limit the call for volunteers, so that the departure of many specialists did not affect the combat effectiveness of the ships. What forces did we have for the defense of Tallinn? At the roadstead stood a cruiser, 2 leaders, 9 destroyers, 3 submarines. The ground forces amounted to about 20,000 men of the army, navy and Estonian workers. We had almost no tanks and very little army artillery, 1 to 3 barrels per kilometre of front. On August 18th we learned that after a stubborn defence Kingisepp had fallen, and on August 21st Krasnogvardisk was left. The situation on the Leningrad direction became more and more threatening. We saw that the enemy was approaching Leningrad, and we felt it keenly. When Sovinform Bureau reports about the situation at the fronts were broadcast on the radio, the voices were silenced at once, and everything in the headquarters stopped. And not only in the headquarters. As soon as Moscow is talking was heard from the loudspeakers, the chauffeurs stopped their work at the cars, the sailors froze on the decks of ships and on the piers of harbours. They listened attentively, trying not to miss anything and memorize everything. In the morning, reporting on the situation on land, the duty officer was worried. Showing a blue line on the map, the enemy front was creeping closer and closer to Leningrad. In mid-August near Tallinn, the pace of the Nazi offensive slightly decreased, and our newly formed sailor detachments on the most threatened, Pärnu direction even took away from the fascists a large settlement. In continuous attacks and counterattacks, both sides suffered heavy losses. All our army hospitals from Libava and Riga withdrew with the army and ended up in Tallinn. A large number of wounded had gathered here. Now it was possible to evacuate them to the rear only by sea. Part of the transports of the Baltic State Shipping Company was converted into hospital ships under the mobilization plan. Among these ships were such ocean beauties as turbo-electric ship VT-509 and passenger motor ship Siberia. They now had a fine staff of medical personnel of all ranks, from orderlies to professors. Of course, we did not keep such ships in Tallinn without need. We called them from Leningrad as needed. And this time, at our call, both hospital ships, guarded by warships, arrived safely in Tallinn. On the way, the guards repulsed several air attacks of fascists and destroyed more than one mine. It would seem to be a simple matter to load the wounded on a steamship and send them to the rear. But it seemed so at first glance. In our environment, it was a difficult task. It was solved by a team of employees of the Fleet Headquarters, Rear Area Department, Political Department, not to mention the medical staff. We had to work in a friendly and coordinated manner because the delay of ships in the roadstead in the besieged base could lead to unfortunate consequences. More than 100 ambulances and city buses brought the wounded to the piers. Dozens of specially equipped barges with wide gangways were waiting for them. The headquarters had to outline the safest courses of passage for the ambulances and allocate guarding ships. The first to leave was VT 509. It was planned to evacuate on it about 6,000 wounded, and the ship is designed for only 500 beds. What to do? The crew of the ship got out of the situation, managed to accommodate all 6,000 people. But there was another unforeseen circumstance. Having learned that there was to be a sea voyage, many wounded, who had never seen the sea before, began to worry. Their condition worsened. Here the medics alone could not cope, and the political department sent a large group of political workers to the floating hospital. They were always among the wounded. Their calmness and vigour influenced people during the transition. I called to the headquarters of the commander of the destroyer Sterigoshi, Captain 2nd Rank E.P. Zbritsky, appointed commander of the convoy. We look at the map, where it is better to go, where there are fewer mines. But there are a lot of mines everywhere. We choose the best variant of movement. Comrade Zbritsky, do you realize the responsibility of your task? The lives of thousands of people depend on you. This is our first major evacuation of the wounded. We must do everything to make it a success. E.P. Zbritsky assured that he understands everything perfectly. He made a number of considerations in case of various surprises. One could see that he was an excellent sailor. The only thing he insistently asked to give him more minesweepers and hunter boats, but we could only allocate 3 basic minesweepers and 4 hunters. Oh, those modest, inconspicuous Moe sea hunters. They quickly became everyone's favourites, and they were needed everywhere. The boats had a wooden hull. They sat shallowly in the water, and therefore rarely exploded on mines. Fascist submarines were sorry to spend torpedoes on them. Airplanes did not bomb them too small a target, and they, fast, manoeuvrable, could sink any submarine with depth bombs, and enemy submariners feared them like fire. The boats reliably guarded our convoys and even warships from submarines, successfully fought sailors' boats, and with aircraft, deftly manoeuvring and skillfully using their small guns and machine guns. They were ship's masters of all hands. They carried patrols and convoyed transports and conducted reconnaissance and put mines in enemy waters. These small ships did wonders in the hands of friendly and brave sailors. The boats were commanded by very young lieutenants, less often senior lieutenants, whose moustaches grew only by Victory Day. And the fleet lacked these very necessary ships. At night I visited the hospital ship, an ocean giant, which had a modest name, VT 509, according to the laws of wartime. What else do you need for the transition? I asked the senior assistant Captain V.I. Faktorovich. We don't need anything. We will try to sail properly, he smilingly answered. He was a real seafarer, and already an experienced warrior. He had received a baptism of fire while being an assistant captain on the transport Viborg. The ship was lost then. Faktorovich was picked up from the water by our boat. The crew of the turbo-electric ship, with exceptional warmth, attention and ingenuity, treated the accommodation of the wounded on the ship. All saloons, bars, restaurants and halls were used. Bunks were set up in the corridors and on the decks. The crew members gave their cabins to the wounded, and in their free time from watch they helped the nurses and caregivers, who are always and everywhere, as a rule, in war are not enough. Sailors affectionately and carefully treated the soldiers with tea, cigarettes, corrected bandages, tried to ward off fear of the sea with jokes. The loading of the wounded was organised without noise and delays. Of course, everyone, starting from the Komflot, showed concern. After all, the enemy airfields were very close. That's why in the darkness you could hear the bass of General Moskalenko, who demanded from the sailors speed and skill. The captains of tugboats were especially hard hit. Moskalenko knew many of them by name and patronymic, shouting into a megaphone. "Ivan Nikolaevich, how long are you going to dance here? It's not a circus. Take the barge and set sail." The old captain commanded hoarsely, tried to explain something, though everything was clear. The experienced sailor was simply afraid to approach the barge sharply, to hit it inadvertently in the side, and thereby cause trouble to the helpless people lying on the stretchers. At dawn, the convoy left the bay. The attention of the entire surveillance and communication service, the headquarters in Tallinn and Kronstadt, was concentrated on these ships. Fascist scouts appeared more than once over the sea, but the bombers did not show themselves. They were operating near Leningrad. But here the posts began to report that in the area where the convoy is moving, heard explosions. Komflot immediately calls me on the phone. "What are those explosions? What does Zabritsky report?" Zabritsky is silent. "We must assume that it's minesweepers blowing up mines, and everything is all right with the transport." That's how I answered, but I was feeling a little nervous myself. Indeed, at Cape Uminda, minesweepers laid as many as 12 mines. One of them killed the minesweeper Krembol, and the convoy continued to move. But here the duty officer runs into the office and reports from the doorstep. "A telegram from Zabritsky. I blew up on a mine near Gobland. I don't need any help." But a terrible and at the same time encouraging telegram. At once instructions to Kronstadt and Gobland Island about rendering assistance to the hospital ship flew over the airwaves. It turned out that it had received a big underwater hole in the bow. 2 stokers were flooded with water, the light went out, it was impossible to go on their own. The ship remained afloat only thanks to quick and confident actions of all personnel. Medical personnel, political workers and sailors of the ship were able to calm the wounded, did not allow destructive panic. The mechanics turned on the emergency lighting. I was told about the heroic behavior of many nurses, and first of all, Anya Korenko and Nina Belova. They did not leave the wounded in the most difficult moments, saved the lives of dozens of soldiers who, alarmed by the explosion, tried to rush overboard. The destroyer Sterigoshi immediately took the damaged ship in tow and led it further along the route. At Lavansari Island, the ships were caught by thick fog. It became dangerous to sail in the narrow fairway. They anchored. At that time, 12 junkers were persistently searching for the convoy. It was good that the fog hid it. VT 509, with all the wounded, arrived safely in Leningrad. The communication between Tallinn and Kronstadt became more and more difficult. Our convoys suffered losses. Fascist aviation annoyed us mainly in the daytime. Mine became our main danger at night. Soon we lost the ambulance transport Siberia. Most of the wounded were saved. And Sibia was killed by fascist bombs, though it was going in a strong guard. On the ship, clearly distinguished large signs of the Red Cross. The fascist pilots saw them perfectly well. But they were accustomed to flouting all international rules. The chairman of the Council of People's Commissars of Estonia, Mr. Lauristin, called. The fleet commander was not there. He was checking the construction of fortifications. Comrade Lauristin asked me to come to him. The head of the government of the Republic was interested in what had been done for the defense of the city, what kind of help we needed. I reported the situation in detail, showed on the map where the fortifications were being built, and said that the main thing we lacked was manpower. Lauristin assured that people would be allocated. We met Johannes Lauristin often from the first days of the establishment of Soviet power in Estonia. He was short, thin, with curly golden hair. With a kind, friendly smile, he quickly won the sympathy of the sailors. We were touched by his attentive, caring attitude to the fleet. When talking about our needs, he invariably told his assistants know that sailors need to be helped. Please do as the fleet asks. 15 years in the prisons of bourgeois Estonia did not go in vain, undermined his health. He was a heroic leader of the Estonian working class, an associate of Victor Kingisepp. Lauristin began his revolutionary activities in Tallinn as an 18-year-old boy in 1917. Neither arrests nor prisons could break his will. Lauristin was a frequent guest on ships, liked to talk to the sailors, asked how their families lived at home, how the sailors understood the policy of our party, and told them a lot about Estonia and its people. At one of the meetings of the Council of People's Commissars, even before the war, our fleet affairs were decided. Vice Admiral Tributes was in Moscow, and I, together with a member of the Military Council G.M. Yakovenko, was ordered to represent the Baltic Fleet at this meeting. It was about the territory for the construction of a communications centre and an airfield. At first I was afraid that we would not succeed. The issues of land alienation were not so easy to solve. But soon my fears began to melt away like spring ice flakes. Some big chief from the apparatus of the Council of People's Commissars objectively, but coldly and indifferently reported what and why the fleet was asking for, what and why it could not be given. I was angry in my heart and was preparing to ask the speaker tricky questions, but Comrade Lauristin beat me to it. He asked the speaker, "If we do not give the fleet this territory, what can you offer? After all, it cannot live without communication." The speaker hesitated and could not say anything useful. Then Lauristin said that the fleet cannot live without communication. It is necessary to meet the sailors. Other members of the government agreed with him. The issue was resolved quickly, as always when the chairman of the Council of People's Commissars took up the task. Yakovenko and I shook hands with Comrade Lauristin, and from that day on we met him as old acquaintances, moreover, as friends. Now I was looking anxiously into Lauristin's face. After many sleepless nights he looked tired and gaunt, but his friendly smile remained unchanged. In the evening of August 19th, VF Tributes and I got out of the headquarters in the air in a wonderful flowering park. Now, it is deserted here, no clamour of children. Hungry pigeons are walking along the alleys. The greenery is crumpled, flower beds are dishevelled. Apparently the gardener's hand has not touched them for a long time. We listen to the distant gun bursts. It is dusk, the evening is warm and fragrant. We do not want to go into a hot, stuffy room. But suddenly we noticed that the rumble of cannonade began to increase. Adjutant of the commander ran up to us. The Nazis began to attack. The rumbling became more and more intense. Conflot left for the control of land defence. Once again phones rang. Reports and requests were pouring in. From the shots of our heavy artillery, coastal defence, and cruiser Kirov, everything shook around. Comrade Lauristin is calling on the direct wire. Comrade Pantalayev, what happened? I'm reporting in detail about the affairs at the front. Inform Conflot that all our comrades are in place. If you need anything, call. By dawn our cannonade had quieted down a bit. We should still save shells. Rear Admiral Drozd and General Moskalenko arrived at the BFCP. We agreed that if we need ammunition for the ships, it is better to give it at night. Barges are already ready. Captain Second Rank V.S. Cherokov reported that 2 torpedo boats had just returned from a combat campaign, in which they sank an enemy patrol ship in the area of Porkalan Kolboda. Tired, anxious, returned to the headquarters of the fleet commander, took my brief report on the night events. In thought he said, "Today we will be hot." It became quite light. On the shore and on the ships sharply beat anti-aircraft guns on the enemy air scouts. Exactly at 6 o'clock in the morning from everywhere began to receive reports that the Nazis moved forward. The enemy was advancing along the whole front, but the main blow was coming from the east, where 2 rifle divisions were involved in the offensive. Thus began the third assault on Tallinn. As you would expect, following the scouts over the raid appeared Nazi bombers. They began furious attacks on cruisers and destroyers. The ships manoeuvred, dodging direct hits of bombs. The rumble of salvos of heavy guns echoed with sharp, frequent slams of coastal and ship anti-aircraft guns. All parts of the defence fought bloody battles. The enemy's superiority in artillery, and especially in aviation, By the end of the day, he managed to cut into our defences in the eastern and southeastern sections. The situation was somewhat better in the Parnu direction. Here the defence was held by a detachment of sailors of Colonel Kostikov. Tall, healthy sailors from ships and batteries of coastal defence, who served in the Navy for 5-6 years, fought skillfully and selflessly. There were few of them left, but they held back the onslaught of a whole regiment of fascists. About heroic deeds of people of this detachment one day will write a stirring book, and then the image of the sailor Komsomol sailor Lomako will appear before us again. He was lying at the machine gun and was firing at the advancing enemy infantry. Several times the fascists went up in attack and every time rolled back. Then they went on a trick. Several Hitlerites crawled around to sneak up to the trench unnoticed. Lomako pretended as if he did not notice them, let them close, and at the decisive moment threw a bunch of grenades. None of the Hitlerites did not rise. The gun crew of 45mm cannon, headed by Junior Sergeant Krasilnikov, repulsed dozens of enemy attacks, shot 5 machine guns of the enemy together with the servants at point-blank range. The only thing the sailors asked Kostikov to give more ammunition. Alas, with shells, grenades, ammunition was tight, and Kostikov's squad had to withdraw. Komflot consulted with General Nikolaev. It was decided to undertake a counterattack. The headquarters developed a plan, gave the necessary instructions to the commanders of units and ships. August 21st, our units tried to counterattack the enemy, but failed and were again displaced. The flank of the 22nd Motorized Rifle Division by the evening of that day was already in the Bay Kolgalakt. Here it was consolidated, supported by reinforced fire of 12-inch battery of Egna Island and gunboats Moskva and Amgun, which were continuously on the flank of the division. This is already only 32 kilometers from the city. To improve the situation, the command of the northwest direction ordered the fleet to land a sea landing in the rear of the fascists in the area of Virtsu. Komflot approved the plan. Lieutenant General A.B. Eliseev was instructed to urgently form a landing detachment and organize its landing. August 23rd, detachment of 5,000 sailors supported by destroyer fire successfully landed in the target area and raised a great commotion in the enemy rear. But the sailors, who had only hand weapons, could not last long. The enemy threw artillery and tanks against them. On the 26th, the remnants of the landing force were withdrawn from the coast. The following days did not bring any special changes in the situation. All along the front fierce battles were fought. The enemy suffered heavy losses, but slowly moved forward. All batteries of our main base, ships from the roadstead, boats from Kolgalakt Bay, destroyers from Ruhukula area were continuously firing. The rumble of the cannonade did not subside for a minute, and we had already gotten used to it. In my accidentally survived workbook there is a record dated August 24. Things are bad near Leningrad, and we too are experiencing critical days. We have begun setting up a rear mine barrier north and south of Seskar Island. Did I think we'd ever put mines here? After all, it's only 50 miles from Kronstadt and 60 miles from Leningrad. We laid about 400 mines. In Tallinn we withdrew to the boundary of the river Pirita, from the deck of the Veronia, where the fleet headquarters moved to. We can clearly see the enemy through binoculars. Detachment Kostikova 16 kilometers south of Poldiski. Ships and coastal batteries rumble all day long, with all their calibers. Reports about daring raids of our armoured trains, built by the workers of Tallinn, remained in memory. One of them slipped into the rear of the fascists, and at Kisa station landed a kind of landing of sailors. They destroyed a division of fascists and captured many machine guns. Armoured trains caused panic in the ranks of the enemy, destroyed firing points and destroyed tanks. It was a good support for our infantry exhausted by continuous battles. The cruiser Kirov, the leader Minsk, all destroyers and submarines to the accompaniment of heavy coastal defence guns are firing day and night. Our adjusters in the troops are working perfectly. From the front we received dozens of telegrams with the hottest words of gratitude for the fire support of infantry. I remember how some infantry commander shouted loudly into the telephone receiver. I'm Torch, thank you, brothers. You're really good. Give me more sailors' fire. The volleys shake everything around. The convoy going to Kronstadt is anchored. It includes transports with the wounded, tanker, no, 11 and the old destroyer Engels. We are very worried about the fate of this convoy. On the quay I meet an excited Brigade Commissar K. P. Dobryabov. He grabs my hand and exclaims enthusiastically, "What a people we have! Bogoteurs." He tells me about anti-aircraft gunners firing at infantry on the Narva highway. For years we have been accustomed to the fact that anti-aircraft guns are aimed at the sky and fire only at the airborne enemy. And now anti-aircraft gunners fought in the fighting order of our infantry and stopped Nazi attacks with direct fire. Our anti-aircraft division, by the fire of their guns, destroyed for the day hundreds of fascists, 4 mortar batteries and 8 machine guns. And the commander of the anti-aircraft machine gun company, Junior Lieutenant Kazban, camouflaged his installations, let the enemy chains at close range, and then whipped at them from 24 barrels. The whole clearing was strewn with the corpses of Hitlerites. The prisoners claimed that the Nazi command gave the order to take Tallinn on August 24th at any cost. I don't know whether the prisoners were lying or not, but that day was really hard. The enemy developed an offensive along the whole front. The density of its fire increased due to the approach of reserves. We did not have a single land cannon or a single tank in reserve, thanks to the pilots of the 10th Air Brigade. They struck a strong blow to the fascist troops. For a few hours the enemy offensive was delayed. Meanwhile, we are trying to regroup forces, although it is obvious that from the rearrangement of the sum does not change. In the afternoon of August 24th, I barely reached the CP of General Nikolaev. The general, tired, thin, did not lose vigor. With a cheerful smile, he said to me, "You know, today Komflot, member of the military council Smirnov, General Moskalenko, and I almost came to the fascists with my own feet. It turns out that the chiefs were going to the Marine Corps CP to Colonel Parafilo, and the CP at that time moved closer to the city. The German infantry was lying in front, and our comrades didn't even know about it. It is good that the enemy began mortar fire and thus opened our eyes," finished the general. I was silent, thinking about how we sometimes behave frivolously. You can't do that in war. Bravado has nothing to do with heroism. Our honourable admirals could pay for it with their heads. At that time, ignoring the harsh laws of war, we all walked in our, almost parade uniform, in caps with gilt, drove around in cars. We did not recognize the protective color, the color of war. And the results? A German plane stitched the car of the chief of staff of the fleet on the highway. Another plane turns into a sieve the car of the chief of political department Muravyov. And still we didn't draw any conclusions. And today on the front line, under fire, fell the military council of the fleet in its entirety. General Nikolaev shows me a map of the land situation. We're looking at it. All around the defense blue line, like a rattlesnake, creeping up to the city. Komflot promised us a battalion of cadets, says the general with hope. Well, if he promised, then there will be cadets. Parts of the 10th Infantry Corps with darkness withdrew to a new line of defence Kila Lagadi Yam. The sailors' detachment pushed back to Poldiski. It was felt that our men had a lot of rage, but no equipment and reserves. Fleet with full strength to support the infantry. In the reflection of the enemy takes part 15 combat artillery ships and the entire coastal and anti-aircraft defence base. This is more than 100 guns from 76 to 305mm caliber. Shipfire crushed river crossings, smashed dozens of tanks, exploded ammunition depots, Nazi infantry pressed to the ground. The day of August 24th cloudy. The sun rarely breaks through because of the heavy leaden clouds overhanging the land. By evening, hand-to-hand fighting has broken out in the suburb of the city, the village of Pirita. On the wall of the mine harbour, lined up a detachment of cadets of the Red Banner Frunz Naval School. This is the last of our reserve. The gloomy grey evening bloomed with the gold of naval badges and blue collars, like cornflowers in the field. The guys are tall, slender, in first-term uniforms. Frankly, I confess, my heart squeezed. After all, these are the future of our fleet, its sons. Vice Admiral Tributes made a farewell speech to the cadets. What they could not hear, they were told by dozens of rumbling guns. Clearly typing step, the detachment hides behind the gates of the harbour. General Nikolaev is waiting impatiently for him. Since the first days of the war, we have heard shooting from around the corner more than once. Estonian Kate's lights and other creeps did not miss an opportunity to sting us. These splinters and traitors pretended to be the people. It is hard to think of a blacker lie. The peoples of the Baltic states have forever tied their fate to their great homeland, the Soviet Union. Thousands and thousands of Latvians and Estonians, shoulder to shoulder with the soldiers of the Red Army and Navy, fought heroically at Libava and Riga, and now together with us defend Tallinn. In the newspaper Communist for August 9th, 1941, we read the Communists and Komsomol members of Latvia are now fighting on the battle line for their socialist motherland at Tallinn. Workers from Riga are showing examples of courage and heroism. Indeed, the first Latvian independent Latvian Rifle Workers Regiment, consisting of communists with the special Komsomol company attached to it, fought against the Nazis, starting from Riga itself. Today the regiment was defending the approaches to Tallinn near the village of Keila. The regiment commander Comrade Libert reported that 12 attacks were repulsed during the day. For 6 days the regiment defended Nome station, but having no tanks and artillery, suffered losses and by evening was forced to retreat. The Estonian Workers' Regiment, in the formation of which Comrade Lauristin took the most active part, fought no less stubbornly. By the evening of August 24th, communication with Colonel Kostikov's detachment was cut off. We knew that he was retreating to Poldiski. As it turned out later, the fascists had surrounded the sailors with large forces. Colonel Kostikov led his men to the breakthrough. They fought hand to hand, who could do anything with rifle butts, knives. Sailors told that Ivan Grigorievich Kostikov was wounded, but he continued to command. He was supported under the arms, and he, with a nagan in his hand, went ahead of his eagles. In the attacks, many sailors died. The colonel's strength ran out, and he fell down. None of the sailors were left next to him. Seeing that there were only fascists around, Kostikov continued to shoot back and left the very last bullet for himself. Those who managed to break through to Poldiski were now commanded by Colonel Suchurin. And here the sailors held on to the last, literally closed the way of the enemy to Poldiski with their chests. On the night of August 24th, the commandant of Aidna Island reported the fascists broke through to Vimsi Peninsula. And this is already the shore of Tallinn Bay. The state of emergency was created, and that's why the military council decided to transfer all personnel of the fleet institutions to the ships at night, leaving only duty service on the shore. An alarming, tense night. The Germans are 10 kilometers from Tallinn. Everyone is at the front, even the militia. The city is deserted. Ours are holding on only thanks to the artillery of ships and coastal batteries. When the cruiser Kirov took a break in firing, General Nikolaev called our CP. What's the matter? Why are the ships silent? The fascists are rising to the attack. Hurry up and fire. And again the cruiser Kirov and other ships beat, pinning the enemy to the ground. I went to the bridge of Varonia and looked at the roadstead. The ships were crowded. In a closed rectangle from coast to coast, slowly moving cruiser Kirov, he was surrounded by nimble, more agile destroyers. The bridge to the counter-courses moved long, low leaders Minsk and Leningrad. And all these powerful ships were continuously beating from their guns. The morning of August 25th came. The sun shone cheerfully. A faint, fresh breeze from the northeast. It's hot, literally and figuratively. Every minute we receive reports from the front or from the commanders of ships. From all sides requests are pouring in. Some of them ask for a tugboat to ferry the wounded to the shore. Others ask for ammunition for anti-aircraft guns. The submarine C-4 returned from the sea. With a victory sunk the fascist transport. It must indicate a safe place of parking. The fascist planes are making the usual morning reconnaissance of the raid, and after that bombers are coming. They drop bombs on the ships and the heavy battery of the island of Aigna, bombing fascists haphazardly. Ships on the move have no hits. Unfortunately, anti-aircraft guns on destroyers and leaders with a low ceiling and low rate of fire. However, at least such guns would be more. In the best position cruiser Kirov, It has, in addition to anti-aircraft guns, have anti-aircraft guns, as well as modern fire control devices, skillfully direct the actions of anti-aircraft gunners, Senior Lieutenants Alexandrovsky and Kravtsov. The situation is extremely tense. However, the usual Navy routine is preserved. We drink tea in the wardroom messenger ship Picker, which now housed the military council of the fleet. And suddenly the hull of the ship shuddered. Through the open large square portholes heard soft splashes, as if a group of swimmers rushed from the bridge of the ship into the water. We run out on deck and see slowly falling snow-white pillars on the smooth surface of the Mine Harbour raid. The enemy field artillery is firing from the Whimsy Peninsula. Ships are manoeuvring, dodging shells. Operations Department of the headquarters urgently develops a new dislocation of the entire mass of ships standing in the various harbours. Hunter boats, torpedo boats, tugs, barges, seaplanes MBR-2 transferred to the west of the peninsula Palyasar. The enemy does not reach there yet. A number of large transports are withdrawn from the merchant harbour. Conflot orders to determine the location of field batteries, shelling harbours and raid, and the fire of the fleet to destroy them. Meanwhile, in the harbour appear boats' smoke curtains. They are led by the head of Combat Training Fleet Captain First Rank Sergei Valentinovich Kudryavtsev. Behind the boats grows a thick, dense cloud, enveloping the entire roadstead. The enemy fire becomes indiscriminate and soon stops altogether. And this is to our advantage. We can at least load the wounded on the transports. 10 kilometers from the city is a fierce struggle for every inch of land. All employees of the political department are sent by the military council to the thick of events, to companies and battalions fighting on the last frontiers. Never forget the professor of the Leningrad University O.V. Tishanovitsa. He replaced the killed commissar of the detachment and more than once raised the Marines in the attack, going ahead with grenades in his hands. I'm urgently summoned by the operational duty officer. At the map are already standing head of the operational department, Captain First Rank GEE, Pilipovsky, and Commissioner of Staff LV, Serebrennikov. Received an urgent report from the convoy commander, reports Lieutenant Commander Ovechkin, and shows a point on the map. I run my eyes over the conventional signs on the map along the convoy's route. Everything is marked here, both attacks and shelling, but I don't see any crosses. So everyone is alive. I can't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Well, report. It turns out that from Tallinn to Kronstadt tonight was a convoy of 9 transports with wounded, with a fairly strong guard. In the morning, the convoy was shelled by a fascist battery from Cape Uminda. Some ships received minor damage, but remained on the move. Later, the convoy was subjected to air attacks. 30 raids were made on the transport Dorgava. The bridge was demolished, boats were broken, steam line was broken, and still the crew saved the ship. At Gogland, the convoy entered the operational zone of the Kronstadt naval base. It was covered by our aviation. On this passage, courage and valour were shown by many Latvians, members of the crew of Dorgava, mechanic Kuts, machinist Berzin, stoker Pinksis. The fate of the barmaid Alma Horst was truly fabulous. She took care of the wounded under enemy bombardment. The blast wave threw her into the water. Dorgava went forward. Our patrol boat picked up the girl and transferred her to another ship, but in a few hours this ship was lost. Alma was again in the water, and again she was picked up by a passing ship. To the general joy of the whole crew, Alma Horst reached Leningrad alive and well, and returned to her steamer. The passage of the last 2 convoys showed that many sections of our most important communication were again heavily mined and, worst of all, the minefields after our trawling are continuously renewed by the enemy. The main minefield is covered by the fire of a heavy German battery. Chief of Operations, reporting the situation, suggests the battery to destroy, and the fairways again trawl. Well, the right proposal. But there were questions: what to destroy the battery, what to trawl the minefields with, what to cover our ships from the air. With a heavy feeling, I went to the commander to report the situation. He makes a decision to send the 12th Division of small minesweepers under the protection of patrol ships for control trawling of the fairway. Immediately at the control room arrived at the head of mine defence, Rear Admiral Rawle. Quickly made a trawling plan. But apparently Neptune was angry with us. since noon a storm began at sea. The wind was northeasterly, 8-9 points, huge waves were breaking on the roadstead. The attempt of the minesweepers to leave the bay was unsuccessful. They could not rake against the storm wind even without trawls. Sending the last 10 basic minesweepers in such weather meant risking the loss of extremely important ships, without which it was easy for the enemy to clog us in Tallinn harbours. A call from the Land Defence Control Room. I recognize the voice of General Nikolaev. He asks that the Military Council urgently come to him. Fleet Commander and Divisional Commissar Smirnov immediately leave. I was surrounded by officers of the staff. What happened? I do not know, I answer them, but I myself feel something bad. Tributes, and Smirnov returned quickly. Conflot on the move ordered to immediately call all the commanders of compounds. The worst thing that could be the Nazis broke through our front in the eastern and southern sectors of defence. At our new flagship command post, organised in the mine harbour, arrive commanders of formations. Feel the general excitement. Calmest others Rear Admiral Rawl and General Moskalenko. Listen to my report on the situation on land and sea. The commander invites each commander of the compound to report in detail the state of the subordinate ships and units. I remember, all reports were accurate, concise. Proposed measures to improve fire control of the fleet. It was also calculated how many people will still be able to give the ships on the land route. All in one voice said that the soldiers perfectly understand the complexity of the situation and are ready to fulfill any task of the command. The Military Council decided to make some rearrangement of ships on the roadstead in order to take them out of enemy fire and to strengthen the assistance to land units. In particular, all gunboats and patrol ships were to approach the shore and, if necessary, to fire direct fire at the enemy. In the evening, after a short pause, the shelling of the raid began again. Nikolai Alexeyevich, don't you think that the candles on the roadstead have become bigger and more solid? I asked Captain First Rank Pitursky. No sooner had we clarified what caliber the enemy was firing than a shell hit the stern of the cruiser Kirov. Pillar of flame, black smoke, thick and resounding explosion. All this appeared somehow instantly and disappeared behind the smoke screen put by the gunboats. We with the Conflot went to the cruiser to find out what kind of help the ship needed. Fortunately, no one was killed, only shrapnel lightly wounded a few people. But the deck on the south and aft rooms were badly torn apart. The fire was quickly extinguished. The ship did not stop firing at the enemy. The very fact of shelling the ships with field guns of 152mm caliber indicated that the enemy was very close to the harbour. Apparently, he pulled up artillery in the suburbs of the city. The raids on the ships continued until just after dark. On the overland route, the battle continued into the night. Our reserves were long gone. There was nowhere else to retreat. There is also nothing to order soldiers and commanders understand the situation and stand to the death. August 26th, 6 o'clock in the morning. At night we beat off strong attacks on the city. The enemy changed tactics, to infiltrate small groups in the suburbs. All airfields are occupied by the enemy. Our aviation flew to the east. The fleet and the city are under bombs and shells. The beautiful Pirita is burning. Other suburbs are burning. Big fires in the city itself. Barricades and barricades are being built on the approaches to the harbours. Smoke everywhere. The fire of ships and coastal batteries does not stop for a minute. Our BFC in Mine Harbour is under fire all the time. This is my last cursory note made in Tallinn. The fighting has not stopped all night. There are fires in the city. Thick smoke is billowing. Machine gun fire is heard. The fascists are already on the outskirts. Early in the morning of August 26th, we receive an order from the Stavka evacuate the main base of the fleet, troops to bring to Leningrad to strengthen its defence. Everything that cannot be removed, destroy. The task is clear, but we have so little time at our disposal. In one day we must prepare the entire fleet for the crossing. That's more than 100 pennants. During that time the troops must withdraw from the front, which means we'll need some cover. It is necessary to load tens of thousands of people and the most valuable property on the ships to work out the route and the plan of transition. We will have to go through the narrow Gulf of Finland, the southern and northern shores of which are already in the hands of the enemy, who has positioned their airfields and batteries on them. We cannot count on the fleet cover fighters. All our airfields are already occupied by the enemy, and 24 Fleet Hawks flew to the east. The Military Council gathered commanders of compounds. It was decided on the evacuation of the base to announce to people in the afternoon of August 27th, just before the start of loading it is necessary for secrecy of the operation. The Department of Military Communications and the rear management had to do a lot of work to arrange ocean transports at the piers, to organize the loading and withdrawal of ships from the harbors. At the Coastal Flagship Command Post, located in newly dug dugouts on the territory of the mine harbor, sand from the slabs fell on their heads, and the floor underfoot shuddered from nearby explosions. But no one noticed it. People were working on the transition plan. The landing of troops on large transports was planned in Koplilakt Bay, on the islands of Naisar and Aegna, at Vimsi Peninsula, in Merchant Harbour, and partially in Mine Harbour, as well as in Poldiski. In stormy conditions, under the enemy's fire, large, clumsy transports were to be placed there. Besides, the enemy managed to sink one of our tugboats, and they were already few in number. This also delayed the deployment of ships. The ships called to Tallinn from Moonsund and the Gulf of Riga had to be included in the transition plan. We considered mines and aviation bombs to be a serious danger on the passage to Kronstadt. During the day you can maneuver, dodging aircraft bombs and bypassing floating mines. But what to do at night, when the mines are not visible? The opinion is unanimous: the main minefield of the enemy on the meridian of Cape Yaminda to force during daylight hours. Comflot agreed with this proposal, approving our calculations. The operational department of the headquarters argued about what general course to go to the fleet. Most of all heated miners and navigators' connections. Miners proposed to immediately trawl the fairway at least to the island of Gogland, using all seaworthy minesweepers, and then trawled fairway to furnish milestones. This, of course, would be the best. But such an operation would take several days. Where to hide dozens of transports with people and property for this time? Finally, the enemy, having discovered without any difficulty our covered fairway, in the first night could again throw mines on it, or move a dozen of our trawling ladders to direct the ships directly to the mines, to guard the trawled fairway. But where could we get so many patrol ships? The navigators suggested that the fleet should take a much more southerly course, close to the coast. It was thought that there were fewer mines there. But the southern shore is in the hands of the enemy. He can pull up here all his artillery. Any ship, at least temporarily lost course, will be here, of course, shot and sunk. In addition, the southern part of the bay is navigationally more difficult for deep-sea transports. Here they will be deprived of the opportunity to maneuver freely when dodging enemy aircraft bombs. Besides, this way is much longer. Our large transport ships have never sailed on it, and for their captains this is a completely new, unfamiliar route. The Military Council approved the plan of the fleet's transition along the general fairway of the Gulf of Finland. Along that route, which we have already spent 223 convoys between Tallinn and Kronstadt since the beginning of the war. There were many logical, theoretically correct proposals, but their authors, unfortunately, hovered in the clouds. For example, it was recommended, just before the fleet's departure, to make powerful airstrikes on all enemy airfields in the Baltic and Finland, as well as on the bases of the fascist fleet in the Finnish Skerries. Well, it was a good idea. But there was a question how to strike the fleet these powerful blows, where to take the strike aviation. After all, in those days Comflot aviation was not disposed of. Moreover, even the chief of the northwest direction could not allocate a dozen fighters to cover the fleet at the transition in daylight. After all, the fate of Leningrad was being decided, and we ourselves were rushing to his aid. No matter how hard it was for us, but not a single plane, not a single gun could not be diverted from the defense of Leningrad. The fleet had to rely on its own forces and break through to the east. That was the decision of the Military Council. We distributed all transport and auxiliary ships into 4 convoys. Each convoy had its own direct guard and had to go strictly behind the trawlers allocated to him. The warships were in the detachment of the main force, in the detachment of cover, and in the rear guard. These 3 squads of warships also needed minesweepers. How many minesweepers were required to secure the passage of 190 different ships, including 70 large transports, through a fairway 3 cable meters wide? All our naval instructions and simple calculations very quickly answered this question. We needed at least 100 minesweepers. We had only 10 basic and 17 slow-moving, non-moving minesweepers, that is, in fact, 1/4 of the need. Nobody could tell us the number of mines placed by the fascists, but according to our calculations it reached 4,000. What was the probability of blowing up the ships on mines with such provision? This question, of course, arose before us, but at the sight of fires and clouds of smoke that covered the sky, under the rumble of shells bursting in the harbour, we did not particularly try to focus attention on such unpleasant figures. As the documents were ready, the chief of the operations department and I checked them carefully. We had to report them to the military council for approval as soon as possible, so that after that we could hand the extracts to each commander of a ship and a unit. The time flew so fast. Fighting was going on in the Dutch village of Koos. This is already in the area of the command post of the land defence of the city, and on the night of August 27th, the Nazis broke through to Kadriorg Park and Lake Julimist. It was obvious that the enemy is trying to cut off our units from the harbours to disrupt the loading of ships. The guns of our ships were hitting at direct fire, destroying the advancing enemy infantry and tanks. The enemy began to shoot at the cruiser Kirov, and he had to move away even more bridge. The destroyers fired only from the move, and also often changed the area of their manoeuvring. With the support of the ship's artillery, our soldiers fought heroically in all areas of defence, going in some places in counterattacks and achieving success in hand-to-hand combat. Thus, at the place of Nome, the sailors pushed the enemy. I remember how enthusiastically Kirill Petrovich Dobrolyubov, brigade commissar, who had just returned from the front, shared his impressions. I visited Skakchkov's battery in the 1st Marine Brigade. At that time enemy tanks approached. The artillerymen let them up and opened fire at point-blank range. They destroyed all 4 tanks. Then the fascists threw infantry on the battery. It captured the firing position. The sailors fought hand-to-hand. Lieutenant Milyukov, Petty Officer Verigin, soldiers Golubyatnikov and Dashevsky fought especially bravely. Sailors killed almost all fascists who broke through to the battery. Our guns remained intact. Now the battery is firing again. We worked all night. On August 27th at 11 o'clock the plan of the breakthrough of the fleet from Tallinn was finally approved and brought to all personnel. Sailors and soldiers explained we are leaving Tallinn in order to beat the fascists under the walls of Leningrad. At 16 o'clock, loading on transports began. The enemy intensified fire on the wharves. Soon loading in the merchant harbour became impossible. Then the transports were transferred to Bykhaskaya harbour. The history of the Russian Navy knows examples when the fleet perished together, with its base. It was so in Sevastopol in 1855, and in Port Arthur in 1905. In Tallinn neither the army nor the navy were going to perish. They were not defeated. By order of the Supreme Command, having preserved their forces, they should move to fight in a new direction, to defend the cradle of our revolution, our native Leningrad. I also remembered another, quite recent. On December 9th, 1940, the British in North Africa went on the offensive against the fortified point and port of Sidi Barrani, defended by the Italian army. A day later, by the evening of December 10th, 40,000th Italian garrison surrendered, considering resistance futile. Later we learned that on February 15th, 1942, the British surrendered to the Japanese naval base Singapore. The fortress had a huge garrison, stationary batteries of large caliber, airfields. And yet, 73,000 soldiers and officers, 28 generals, led by the commander-in-chief of the British Malaya troops, unconditionally capitulated. And 3 months later, in the same year 1942, we learned that the British surrendered to the Nazis in North Africa their naval base Tobruk. The base was defended by 2 army corps with 700 tanks. 30,000 British soldiers and officers surrendered as prisoners. Already everything was different. Not a single platoon of soldiers, and not a single serviceable gun we did not leave the enemy in Tallinn. Everyone knew that a difficult and dangerous path awaited us. I talked to dozens of soldiers in the harbour during landing hours, looked hundreds in the eyes. The men were tired, but I didn't see a shadow of confusion. Calm faces. Faces of people who realized that they had done their duty. People understood that we were going to defend Leningrad, that we had already helped the defenders of the great city, delayed the enemy near Tallinn for almost 2 months, drew 5 divisions, 3 of them coming from near Leningrad. The fascists threw themselves into furious attacks. By evening, the merchant's harbour was under mortar fire. Heavy fires started in the port. There was already no telephone communication, and I decided to go to the harbour in search of one of the large transports, which for some reason had not yet stood under loading. Together with the Ordinarian, we rushed in a gazik. The city was shrouded in smoke. In some places we jumped literally through the wall of flames. Once amazingly clean sidewalks were covered with rubble and broken glass. Now and then there were burned cars, broken streetcar wires hanging from tilted poles. Past the burning buildings fly into the port. The enemy is firing mortars at the piers from the side of the monument Rusalka. It is unknown from where bullets whistle. The impression is as if the whole port is on fire. To our joy, there were no ships in the harbour. The captains showed reasonable initiative and took them out from under fire. Tanks with oil were broken. A sea of fire was spilling all around. The trunk of a sunken floating crane was sticking out of the water. The air was hot and stuffy. To give the troops the opportunity to withdraw from the forward positions, our artillery in the evening opened a hurricane fire, and specially designated units went into counterattack along the entire front. Here they did not spare shells. The fascists trembled and even fell back. At 21 o'clock began the withdrawal of our troops from the last positions. The troops stretched in a long line to the harbours. Smoke screens, put by boats, reliably covered the landing, which took place leisurely, without noise and commotion. People were tired. They had not slept for several days, and having got on the transport, immediately stretched out anywhere on the deck and fell asleep with a bogatir's sleep. Destruction of military facilities of the base began. I stand on the bridge of the Veronia and see explosions in the arsenal, in many military warehouses. Smoke of fires, the terrible roar of raging flames. The signalman reports covering the Minsk we look indeed. Minsk stopped firing and sharply turned away. The destroyer soon also stopped firing. Around it there was a solid fence of bursts. My heart clenched. Did something serious happen just before the exit? 10 minutes later, a joyful semaphore from Rear Admiral Drozd on Minsk. 2 guns are slightly damaged, on Skory 2 hits of small caliber shells. Both ships are in service. A sigh of relief escaped us. Commandants of the landing in the harbours, and on the piers we appointed officers of the staff and political department. The most dangerous thing now is to allow traffic jams on the burning streets, on the docks. It is no joke to load many thousands of fighters on the ships. Landing everywhere was organised. Our commandants deserve a lot of credit for this. In the Merchant's Harbour Military Engineer of the 3rd rank Guliev, in the Mine Harbour Military Technician of the 2nd rank Shalepin, in Bekhorovskaya and the Russian Baltirsky Plant Battalion Commissar Pospeshin and Senior Lieutenant Bezrukov. All day long I was on the walls of the mine harbour, meeting and directing to the berths small groups of wounded, representatives of fleet and Estonian institutions, solving small misunderstandings on the spot, giving necessary orders through the liaison officers who were with me. It was too late to hope for telephones. Broken wires were lying under our feet. Here comes a young lieutenant of the Marine Corps. His head is bandaged. The bandage is soaked with blood. With him, a group of wounded soldiers. In the officer's hands is a note, Copley locked, but that's not here at all. The lieutenant explained that they were travelling in trucks. On the square in the column the enemy stuck several shells. The front cars caught fire. His group decided to follow on foot, and here they reached. I ordered the commandant of the landing lost not to return, but to send to the headquarters ship Veronia. This sea beauty, once a steamship of tourist passenger line Riga-Stockholm-Helsinki, stands here at the pier, swaying slightly. Anti-aircraft gunners in helmets sit at the guns and periodically open fire on the appearing planes. on the Veronia loaded fleet headquarters and political department. Officers have already settled in the cabins. Here comes down the gangway NG, Mikhailovsky, our naval writer. He waves to me from afar and smiles affably, as if he is in the Black Sea port climbing on the deck of a resort ship running on the line Odessa-Batumi. By 24 hours, Veronia takes its place on the roadstead. Captain First Rank S.V. Kudravtsev reports that all the chemical warehouses are devastated and engulfed by fire, and there is little smoke mixture on the smoke suspension boats. We spent all of it on your favourite Veronia, Sergei Valentinovich grumbles. Yes, that's where we oversight. Smoke mixture is now indeed no longer available. A group of comrades approaches us. The fleet commander is with them. I say hello to Loristin, chairman of the Council of People's Commissars of the ESSR. Here are the People's Commissars and members of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Republic. We exchange impressions of the day. Fleet commander informs Loristin that the troops have broken away from the enemy and landing on transports is normal. Mine bursts are approaching the pier. Having accelerated the farewell, we divorce our passengers on the boats that will take them to the ships standing on the roadstead. A little later, at dusk, we saw off the chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the Republic, the famous Estonian poet I. Var is. As soon as the loading was over, we pushed the transports to the roadstead to their designated parking places near the islands of Naisar and Aidna. The weather did not improve. The storm roared, the wind pressed the ships firmly against the walls. Large transports had to be pulled from their berths by tugs. Now a lot depended on these small skittish vessels, tireless workers of the sea. Major General Moskalenko, the head of the rear of the fleet, appeared on the pier. With a mighty bass, seemingly able to drown out anti-aircraft gunshots, he was razzing someone, demanding to immediately withdraw the tugs from under the enemy's mortar and artillery fire. It's damp. At times comes a fine nasty rain. Empty piers, fewer and fewer people in the harbour, the noise of the multi-voiced crowd subsides, and the explosions of mines and shells seem especially loud. In the twilight at the harbour sea gate, twitching on the mooring, the old Russian warship, the former minesweeper Amur, stands grimly. Not a light on it. No crew is visible on deck, no flags are flying on the masts, and no smoke is billowing from the two tall pipes. The veteran of the Baltic Fleet, on whose mines in the First World War died more than one enemy ship, will no longer leave the old harbour. He must fulfil his last duty to the motherland after our departure to sink in the gates of the harbour in order to lock them for a long time for the enemy. The destroyers and patrol ships from Moonsund have arrived, and the two transports with the heroic garrison of Poldiski, following under the protection of warships, are obviously delayed. There had been no telephone communication with Poldiski for a long time. There had been fighting there since morning. The warships could not stay in Moonsund any longer after we left Tallinn. There would be no one to supply them with fuel, water, or ammunition. These ships did their job. They accomplished a lot in 2.5 months of war. While the fleet was in Moonsund, the enemy did not risk anything against the islands. Our ships made 7 major raids on enemy communications, sinking and damaging 5 destroyers, 4 torpedo boats and 10 transports. Finally, in Moonsund and in the Gulf of Riga, held under the protection of warships, 30 convoys, with only 1 transport, was lost. Of great importance was the setting of active mines in the Strait of Urbina and in the Gulf of Riga. More than 1,200 mines and mine guards were put out by our sailors on the enemy communications. It is completely dark. The harbour is empty. There are only 2 boats and a messenger ship Picker. It must deliver the military council of the fleet with the campaign headquarters to the cruiser Kirov. The fighting is already going on near the harbour. In the rumble of machine gun and artillery fire burst deafening explosions. Behind the houses is blazing fire, then bright red, then orange, then almost white, and everywhere to the sky rises thick black smoke. Against the background of the glowing clouds, the outlines of the pics, so characteristic of the Tallinn landscape, are clearly drawn out. Thunder is heard in the west, and suddenly there is a fairy picture. Thousands of multicoloured stars fly to the sky, scattered with bright sparks. This is burning fleet warehouses of signal rockets. In the dugouts of the headquarters to collect property, documents. I go around all the rooms once again. There is an unpleasant dead silence in them. Machines no longer knock, officers do not dictate urgent documents. The gates to Mine Harbour on the city side are closed. They are guarded by a small team of sailors with machine guns. Behind the bars of the gate flicker less and less often the figures of fighters. Arrived from the raid Rear Admiral Yuri Fedorovich Rawl. At the transition he will command the rear guard, that is, the forces covering the entire armada of ships from the rear. Yuri Fedorovich came on his boat, shook off the water, calmly, as always reported that the sea is fresh, no less than 7-8 points, and the roadstead is intensively shelled by enemy artillery. Hitlerites shoot without aiming at the area. The shells are thickest at the harbour gates. Apparently Hitlerites are waiting for our ships to come out. Did not notice that almost all of them have already left the harbour. Rawl clarified in the headquarters all that is associated with the mined harbours and raids after our departure. The War Council decided to move to the cruiser at 4 a.m. on August 28th. I, with the second echelon of the campaign headquarters, should arrive at the Leader Minsk at 7.00. The last at 8.00 will leave Tallinn land Rear Chief General Moskalenko after the destruction and blocking of the harbour. Time stretched slowly, and besides the night was dark and damp. Captain First Rank G.E. Pili Pilipovsky returned from Kopli, sent to search for another missing, the largest transport of 10,000 tons, without which thousands of soldiers risked to stay on the shore. Everything turned out safely. The transport was anchored in the bay without lights, and because of the storm did not dare to approach the wall. It was waiting for tugboats, and they could not find it for a long time in the darkness. That was the whole incident. Pilipovsky returned back through the whole city under the whistle of bullets, through smoke and cinders. The enemy was almost at the gates of Mine Harbour. Smoked, all in soot, Grigory Efimovich calmly reported. Everything is in order, loading ends. But to return to the harbour I had lost all hope. The streets are blocked by barricades. You can't understand where they're firing from. At night the fire on Mine Harbour stopped. The fascists failed to shoot down our covering units. Now we are pulling them to the piers and loading them on ships. Landing everywhere went well. The ships took from the shore more than 23,000 people, as well as about 66,000 tons of various cargoes. By dawn the whole fleet was at the roadstead. We did not leave a single platoon of soldiers or sailors to their fate. At 4.00 we received the last instructions of the Komflot for the transition. We escorted the military council of the fleet to the cruiser Kirov. 2 boats remained in the harbour, a small hunter for my campaign headquarters and a torpedo boat for the rear chief, General Moskalenko, and officers of his group. In the harbour is empty and quiet. At the pier orphaned swaying our boats, the team stands at their places in readiness to leave. No one else returns from the city. It's slowly getting light. At 7.00 we bid a friendly farewell to General Moskalenko. The boat takes us to the Leader Minsk. According to the plan of the campaign, I am the first deputy commander and commander of the cover detachment. The campaign staff is headed by my deputy captain first rank Nay Pitursky. With us Commissar of the Fleet Headquarters, Brigadier L.V. Serebrennikov. At the roadstead is fresh. Before reaching the warm, cosy cabins Minsk we all got pretty wet, as the boat is strongly buried, and it often covered the wave. Here and there were water candles, shells of fascist artillery fell. But the ship stood on the seaside, out of the fire. A few minutes after the arrival of the marching headquarters on the ship was deployed flagship command post, and Nay Pitursky reported the situation. First of all, about the weather, the storm as if began to subside. Low grey clouds are thinning, softer became the wave, but still fresh, and small ships to go out risky. Because of the forced delay, we have to force the main minefield at Uminda already in the dark. It's bad, but there's nothing we can do about it. From the bridge, I'm inspecting the roadstead. All ships are standing according to the disposition plan. The transports Balkash and Kumari with the heroic garrison of Poldiski are on their way. The sailors never gave up their positions to the enemy. They repulsed 14 fierce attacks of fascists and held on until the order to withdraw and board the transports was received. How pleasant it is after several sleepless nights to have a good wash and enter the shining, clean cabin compartment of Minsk, to sit here in the circle of officers of the headquarters and the ship. At the table, everyone warmed up. For a few minutes, hardships were forgotten. The dinner passed cheerfully with jokes and laughter, but not before we finished the traditional naval compote, as I was urgently summoned to the bridge. "Comrade Admiral, look," the signalman said in a trembling voice and pointed towards the city. "Through binoculars I can see that there is no more scarlet Soviet flag over Vyshgorod. In its place is the tricolour flag of bourgeois Estonia. My heart clenched. Tallinn, its ancient towers, cathedrals and pickaxes became alien at once. There was silence on the bridge. We could hit that flag with all the guns we had. It would be pointless. In the meantime, 2 bursts of shells soared off the side of our Minsk. Signallers have detected the battery's location. It's in the woods on the Vimsi Peninsula. Damn it, they've already gotten here." The commander of the leader, Captain second-rank PNN, Petunin, ordered to open fire on the battery, and then the leader changed its anchorage. Only we got rid of the battery as we saw various dinghies and fishing boats floating along the roadstead. From the shore, the fascists were firing machine guns at them. These were the townspeople who had decided at the last moment not to stay with the fascists. Better late than never. The ships launched boats to pick up the people who were leaving the enemy. Not a single boat was left on the water. Passengers on the ships were arriving. Exhausted people met the sailors, and officers the most attentive and friendly attitude. On our leader, reception of guests was engaged by the commissar of the ship. Raised he, as a kind host, found for everyone an affectionate word, calmed, joked, encouraged. Of course, it was not the time to ask all these people why they had not evacuated earlier. Everyone had their own reasons. With touching care, the sailors helped women and children to get comfortable, treated men with cigarettes, brought food from the galley. At 11:30 a.m., the signal was received the fleet at 12:00 to start moving. We were parting with Tallinn, leaving the ancient base of the Russian fleet Revel, created by our grandfathers more than 2 centuries ago. Probably different thoughts and thoughts possessed people, but one thought we had in common: to return to this roadstead sooner. "Aren't we leaving early?" No, it was impossible to hold Tallinn any longer. Heroism and dedication were not enough. There's a limit to everything, including human fortitude. Tallinn's garrison didn't even have one full-blooded division. There were neither tanks nor field guns. In 24 hours, the Nazis would have stormed the city, and its defenders would have been mercilessly massacred. This would have been a betrayal of our heroic fighters and the local inhabitants. The decision of the Stavka to evacuate was correct. Organized withdrawal of troops to a new battlefront has never been considered a defeat in the history of the war. The fleet had to pass the narrow Gulf of Finland, 321 kilometers. During 250 kilometers, both coasts were occupied by the enemy, and 120 kilometers of the way were densely mined. On both banks there were enemy airfields, batteries of medium to heavy caliber, and in the skerries behind 100 islands lurked submarines and torpedo boats. Naval science requires that each operation should be provided with various forms of preliminary impact on the enemy. But life has made its merciless adjustments. Do not want, but it is necessary to go to the breakthrough, and as soon as possible, even if without air cover, without the necessary number of minesweepers, without preliminary strikes on the enemy's fleet and aviation. The first convoy began moving at 12 hours and minutes. 9 transports with troops, auxiliary ships and 3 submarines were covered by 5 slow-moving Izhora, 5 boat minesweepers, and 5 hunters. The core of the escort was a modern at the time of the destroyer Svarpi, strong enough for sea combat and very weak to fight with aircraft. The convoy was commanded by an excellent sailor, Captain second rank Nikolai Georgievich Bogdanov. From the high bridge of the leader we watched how the big clumsy ocean transports turned around and slowly built up in the keel behind several pairs of minesweepers, which seemed to be toys in front of them. There was no room on the decks of the transports, all filled with men, waving their arms and caps as they passed the formation of warships. Signalman minute-by-minute reports. Comrade Commander, the Voronia has dropped anchor. Kazakhstan has dropped anchor. The report about the penultimate ships of the convoy, which had not yet had time to lay down at the exit gate of Tallinn, was drowned out by a strong explosion. Everything went silent on the bridge. Binoculars were directed to the place of a big splash in the head of the convoy. A mine had exploded in the trawls of the first pair of minesweepers. It interrupted the trawls and delayed the movement of all the convoys. On the bridge someone said grimly, "Here we go." The water column settled, and we saw that the ships were intact. The mine exploded at the entrance gate, where more than one ship had passed a day ago, and many times trawlers with trawls had passed. Apparently we're dealing with magnetic mines. Their fuses are set to a certain multiplicity. They react not on the first and not on the second passage of ships or trawls over them, but on the 10th, maybe on the 20th. At 14 hours and minutes, a small convoy no. 4, consisting of 9 different small auxiliary vessels, self-propelled special barges and tugs, began to unanchor. All of these small vessels were also full of men. The convoy was guarded by 2 hunters and 9 gunboat minesweepers. It was commanded by Captain 3rd Rank Glukovtsev. At 15 o'clock, 2 fascist reconnaissance planes passed over us in different directions at a very high altitude. The ships began to fire anti-aircraft guns, but the planes disappeared in the clouds. Now, from minute to minute wait for dive bombers. I ordered the ships of our detachment to play the battle alarm. By this time the wind had almost dropped, the wave was calming down. The sounds of the bugle were heard all over the roadstead. Anchored convoy number 2, 10 large transports and auxiliary ships, 8 slow-moving and 8 boat minesweepers and 4 more warships. The convoy is commanded by the commander of the division of gunboats, Captain 2nd Rank Antonov. And after another 20 minutes moved, and the largest convoy number 3. It includes 10 transports and a tanker. Accompany them 4 hunters, rescue ship, 4 boat and 4 slow minesweepers. Later 2 transports with the garrison of Poldiski were included in this convoy. The convoy was commanded by an old sailor, Captain 2nd Rank Jansen. The roadstead was deserted, the ships went northward, and in the distance, on the horizon, turned eastward. The fleet moved along the narrow fairway. On both sides are islands, shoals, sandbanks, which are so rich in the Gulf of Finland. Maybe the enemy has already managed to sow mines all our long way. The transports are already far away, and General Moskalenko's subordinates are still operating in the mine harbour. The piers and the last warehouses have been blown up. The old Amur and 3 schooners are sunk in the harbour gates. Ships rearguard under the leadership of Rear Admiral E.F. Rawl, under enemy fire, began to mine the harbour. The patrol ship Beria laid individual banks of mines in Kovlilak Bay, and Surop Strait Sneg and Cyclone laid mine banks at the entrance to the roadstead, and the minesweeper Vainlow mined the merchant harbour and the inner Tallinn roadstead. In total, more than 100 different mines were laid out. Despite the Nazi fire, our ships were not damaged. The mines, according to the German admirals themselves, caused the enemy a lot of trouble. During the occupation of Tallinn, several fascist ships were blown up and perished on the roads and in the harbours. At 16:00 anchored the main forces of the fleet. Behind 5 base minesweepers went cruiser Kirov under the flag of Komflot, followed by the leader Leningrad and destroyers, submarines and other warships. In total, the detachment of the main forces numbered 25 pennants, in addition to rescue and icebreaking ships. Quickly built in a marching order, the ships caught up with the convoys and covered them from airplanes with their anti-aircraft fire. At 17 o'clock, it was our turn, the covering squad. The commanders of the ships had long been waiting for the signal to take off the anchor. Everyone was already on the bridges, and the tank crew with bosuns at the spires. No sooner had the signal of Buka on the flagship reached the place than all the ships started to work the spires, and the anchor chains rumbled. Leader Minsk, destroyers, submarines built in a keel column and went after the 5 base minesweepers. In total, there were 20 warships in the covering detachment. Rare splashes from the fall of enemy shells were left behind and lost against the background of smoke and fire on the shore. The outlines of the city paled. Only towers, pickaxes, and the Russian cathedral were still distinguishable. The sailors looked sadly at the city, and each thought, "When will we return to you? Tallinn, of course we will. And soon." That's exactly how I wanted to shout, so that it would be heard on the shore. We were sailing at 12 knots behind the minesweepers. I stood on the bridge and looked at the keel column of destroyers. How beautiful were these ships! They went, raising snow-white storms. Hardly had the group of ships equalled the island of Egna with its old 12-inch turret batteries as there were explosions. With the fleet gone, we no longer needed the batteries. Before our eyes, the gun turret suddenly flew up over the forest, stayed in the air for a second, and crashed down with a crash into a bowl of fire. Then all was silent. Only above the forest slowly rose to the sky thick black smoke. The explosions on the islands followed one after another, their powerful roars angrily proclaiming that we were leaving nothing for the enemy but stones and ashes of fires. The smoke on the islands closed off the city from us. We saw through binoculars how some ship approached the island, apparently for subversive parties. The sailors from Tallinn left with a clear conscience. They had conducted 549 firings, releasing 13,000 shells on the enemy's head. The fleet sent more than 16,000 sailors and commanders to the land front. These shock detachments, together with the army units, delayed the Nazis near Tallinn for more than a month. The Germans boasted to the whole world that they would be in Leningrad on July 21st, but on August 28th they occupied Tallinn, having withdrawn 3 infantry divisions from the Leningrad direction. Several compounds of fascist aviation were also transferred here from under Leningrad. Many Hitler's airplanes silenced their engines forever near Tallinn. More than 100,000 soldiers cost the fascists the capital of Estonia. Dozens of tanks dotted the fields on the approaches to the main base of the fleet.